The podcast you are about to listen to is not a medical podcast, nor is it designed to diagnose a condition. While there are medical experts on this show, any questions regarding medical care or concern should be directed to a primary care physician.
Welcome to Game On Glio, the podcast providing hope, inspiration, education, and real conversations around the difficult journeys of grief and loss, and being diagnosed with brain cancer, such as glioblastoma. I'm your host, Shannon Traphagen. If you enjoy our show, please consider writing a review. Also, share us with a friend. You can follow us on Facebook at Game On Glio or on Instagram at Game On Glio Podcast. Or you can visit our website, thegameongliopodcast.com, for our blog, insights, and guest snapshots. Season 2 of the Game On Glio podcast is sponsored by GT Medical Technologies and Gamma Tile Therapy. Learn more at gtmedtech.com. Welcome, everybody, to episode 10 of the Game On Glio podcast. Thank you so much for joining us this month. We have a very special episode in store for you today, and I cannot wait for you to hear from our guest. Today, we are talking about grief, specifically childhood grief and loss. More than 5 million children in the U.S. will experience the death of a parent, sibling, or primary caregiver by the time they turn 18. Children who experience significant loss are more likely to face challenges with mental health, poor academic performance, and negative long-term physical and financial outcomes in adulthood than their non-grieving peers. That's why it's so important to address childhood grief and loss quickly. Just as with adult grief and loss, children need to know they're not alone. So many in our brain cancer community struggle with helping their children deal with a parental or sibling death. As adults, we aren't the only ones suffering. Children suffer too. Just like us, they need ways to cope, find strength, and have hope. My guest today, Sara Deren, is the founder and CEO of Experience Camps, a national nonprofit that gives grieving children experiences that change their lives forever. Sara received her MBA from Columbia University and leads Experience Camps with her blend of business background and passion to make the world a better place. In 2020, she received an award for Best Entrepreneur from Connecticut Entrepreneur Awards and was named a Patriots Difference Maker by the New England Patriots Foundation. Sara, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So, explain to our listeners a little bit about what Experience Camps are. How did you start this endeavor? And, is there a personal connection for you? What made you decide to get into this? And what is it? What are Experience Camps?
Yeah, that is a great question. Got a lot of great questions. And most people, I get that question a lot in terms of how we started this. And I usually get it with a little bit of a sad face because there tends to be that assumption, which is a reasonable one, that when somebody starts an organization based on childhood grief, that there is a personal connection. In my case, yes, the connection was personal, but it was not grief related. And the way it started for me was I met my husband actually at business school, which you just mentioned, and he is and was a camp director, a summer camp director and owner at a camp in Maine. Mm-hmm. So as we got married and had a family together, my life became entwined with summer camp, which is something that until that point I had not experienced. I didn't go to camp as a kid. I didn't know summer camp, but I very quickly learned through my time spent there how incredibly transformative all summer camp can be for kids, not just grief camp, which we'll get to in a minute, but watching kids really find their true selves and build their character and find themselves in this way that was so beautiful through play and through, frankly, being away from their parents and kind of experiencing nature and really learning how to be great humans outside of their normal, typical school year environments. And I was really taken with it. And as we were kind of moving through our lives together, and I was kind of finding myself being pulled away from the corporate world where I was in at the time, my husband and I decided to start a nonprofit organization using camp as the premise, right? Using camp as the backdrop
Mm-hmm.
for kids who maybe wouldn't otherwise get to go to summer camp. And as we were developing that with a pretty vague starting point, right? Just any kids who couldn't come to summer camp, there was a camp that reached out to us also in Maine that was a girls' camp. Ours was a boys' camp. And they said, hey, we're doing this bereavement program for girls. They have brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you might want to do with us? And it was just like all the stars lined up in that
Interesting.
moment. We had started this nonprofit. We were looking for sort of that cause that would really resonate. And, there were definitely people within our community and in our lives that, especially around that time, there was a bit more of an aha moment when that was presented to us.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found from that and over the years is that people often don't think about childhood grief until they have experienced it firsthand, either as the caregiver of a child or as a child themselves. But once you are sort of presented with this idea, it's very hard to look away. And I know from my experience when this idea came to us or this opportunity came to us,
Right.
it was like, of course that needs to exist. How does this not exist? I can't even imagine. And I couldn't truly, most people can't imagine unless they've been through it, how much these kids would need a place where other people understand them and get it and are like them in their experiences. So it was not from that original, again, my personal connection point, other than through my connection with camp. But I would certainly say over these last now 15 years, a piece of each of those stories I've heard, and thousands of stories I've heard over the years, have become my story.
Mm-hmm.
And a piece of them stays with me. And that's part of what I think is such a privilege to be in this position as what we call an exquisite witness of these stories, somebody who can hold space for other people's pain and grief and experiences and make it part of their own, fiber,
Mm-hmm.
and to take forward into the world and hopefully make it a little bit better through those experiences that they can share.
Now, how long ago did you start the first camp? How many years ago?
So this coming summer will be our 15th year. We started in
Wow.
2009.
Okay.
And we started with 27 kids that first year. It was all boys to begin with because we had that other girls program that was running their program. And it has grown and grown and grown from there, entirely based on the need and the demand that we've seen for it.
Mm-hmm.
The kids come back year after year. About 85 to 90% of kids come back. So we're continually trying to build and create more space for kids to make sure that we don't have to turn anyone away.
Right.
So we had those 27 kids at our camp in Maine, and then we grew and we expanded. And this year, going into next summer, we will have 6 locations around the country. We run 12 programs. We're now boys and girls in every one of the regions that we serve.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll have 1,200 kids around
Mm-hmm.
the country and from other countries as well that come to these camps.
Wow.
So we're seeing an incredible need, incredible demand, especially after the last few years. The application rate has just been through the roof.
Because of the pandemic.
Yes, because of the pandemic, I would say for sure. But when I say that, I mean in part because of COVID losses, but in part, and if not more so, what we're seeing is from sort of those tangential losses to COVID. The overdoses and suicide losses, certainly, the health situations that weren't dealt with during the pandemic. We're seeing a lot of more reasons to grieve, but also just a lot more grief.
Mm-hmm.
Those who had pre-existing grief before the pandemic happened, the isolation that was caused during the pandemic
just exacerbates
so much. So we're seeing kids show that we're seeing more kids with grief, but we're also seeing more grief and more heaviness to a lot of kids and adults that
Mm-hmm.
we're coming into contact with.
So during your research, because from everything that I've gathered from previous conversations and from our connection online and from your website, it's very research laden. When you guys started really developing the camps and as you continue to grow and increase, there's a lot of research and a lot of work that goes on in the back end. I'm curious, when you look into the statistics and the research on childhood grief and loss, what surprises you most? What shocked you in learning about childhood grief?
I would say what surprises me most is that it's so common in a way. There's so many grieving children. There's
Hmm.
so many grieving people. And yet we live in a society that's so afraid to talk about it. And where most people who are grieving will tell you they feel alone,
Hmm.
even though there's so many people around them that are likely grieving too. So I think what surprises me the most is that we haven't come further as a society at this point in talking about it and in being open about it and in leaning into those conversations about grief and death and dying. I think we're
Hmm.
starting to get better. Honestly, that's probably one of the positive outcomes of the last few years is that people are getting better at talking about it, but we're not there yet.
Hmm.
And I think particularly for kids, the natural reaction that I see a lot of adults have is trying to protect them because that's what you want to do for kids. But they do that in a way that is often a little bit misguided in trying to kind of bury the feelings rather than open it up for discussion. And I think
Hmm.
in trying to protect them, they end up wrapping them up in a protective bubble of silence that doesn't serve them well and
Right.
further isolates them not only with their adults in their lives but also their peers who kids naturally aren't going to be good at talking about this, so they really need the adults to model it and to create that space to teach the other people around them how
Hmm.
that should look.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, it's habitual, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you teach what you've learned yourself. You
Right.
recreate and act the way that you were taught growing up. And so if adults, which I talk about very frequently on this show, that adults have trouble expressing their grief. I mean, I talk about counseling and asking for help and being able to be open and communicate all the time because that is
Mhm.
something that even in adulthood we don't do very well, especially when we're talking about severe grief and loss. So if those tools aren't provided to the adults because what they learned as a child was to find other ways to cope, to bury it, to put it aside, to
Mhm.
keep moving on, then that's exactly what they're going to teach their children. So it's this cyclical pattern that we need to be able to break out of both as adults and in childhood so that we can bring our children into a better pattern of communication when they're dealing with these severe losses.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And I think, for better or worse, we all talk about sort of the negative impacts of social media on our world and on our children. But that's actually one of the places where I think we're seeing a lot more openness
Mhm.
naturally on social media, maybe because it's a little bit more protected in terms of, being behind a screen and you can say more things or connect in different ways. But that's honestly where I'm seeing that shift more quickly than in the in-person interactions. And hopefully that, one bleeds into the other in terms of how we can normalize the expression of grief.
Right. So now let's dig into the camps themselves a little bit. Paint us a picture. What experiences do they have at camps? What types of activities do they do? How long are the kids at camp? Give us an idea of what a typical week would look like for campers.
I would love to. I know you can't see me right now, but like I smile as soon as you start asking that question because I'm so excited to talk about camp. It's magical. So the kids, most of them arrive by bus. So, right, so you picture a bus pulling into a campground. There's trees and buildings and cabins and everything around you, and they pull up. And just to paint the picture a little bit of any kid, most kids that have ever come to experience camps for the first time come somewhat reluctantly, I will say. And if you ask most kids who are grieving, do you want to go to a camp away from your home and your bed and your technology and your family and hang out with strangers and talk about grief for a week? How does that sound? Most of them will tell you no.
Nope.
Right? Like on the surface, it doesn't seem like the best idea. Somehow we still get the kids to show up, but they do come a little bit nervous, right? Like they're coming off of this bus, their shoulders are up around their ears and a little bit
Mhm.
hesitant to walk off that bus into what they're walking into. And what they walk into is the first thing they see is it's a dance party. There is music blasting. There's all of our volunteers kind of in a circle around the bus, cheering and clapping and ready to welcome them into this insane amount of energy and love and warmth. And I mention this because you can literally see as these kids are walking down, it happens every single year. And I stand back behind what is happening and I just cry every single time. It's like my favorite day of the year watching kids get off the bus because I know, and I can see their shoulders coming down and they start to smile. And there's this shift that you see literally as they're coming off the bus. And I get that like tingle because I'm like, this kids, they don't even know what's about to happen. It's going to be amazing. And from that point, we welcome them in, we grab their bags down to the bunk, and we just roll. We start being active. And that's really the starting point of everything we do is play. They're there to be kids again. They're there to reclaim childhood. They're there to get loud, dance, play football, hacky sack, whatever it is that we're doing. It's about getting into your childhood and playing and breaking down those walls, breaking down those barriers they have to connecting with other people because of what they've been through. So we start with play. That first day is all about the energy. It's about showing them that this is going to be fun, right? Because they came with these assumptions that it's not going to be. It was probably described to them in a not such a fun way. So here we are sort of changing those assumptions and attitudes, and they realize very quickly this is a place that will be good. And these are people they can trust. And from that, we can do the real meat of the work we want to do with them, which is helping them open up, helping them connect, helping them share their stories. And that's where it's the combination of all of those things that you begin to see those transformations. So that first day is all about play. It looks like any other summer camp that you've ever seen, on TV or in person if you've been to camp. There's lakes, there's pools, there are fields. We do tug of war. I mean, it's all the fun and games of camp.
So kind of like icebreakers.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, the whole day is meant to break the
whole
ice.
Premise.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they really, again, they loosen up. Kids start with play. From there is where we're able to help start to put some language to what they're experiencing. So from that day from the first day, after the first day, we have sharing circles and then clinical activities each day that are facilitated by grief specialists. So these are clinically informed master's level clinicians that come and facilitate peer support activities with the kids. One of them is the sharing circle. Like I said, an opportunity for them to tell their story, to put words to their experience, to share a picture of their person who died, to remember. And some of them will open up right away. Others, you'll see it happen year after year as they've been doing this with their bunkmates, the same kids for a number of years. And their story, it evolves, right? So what they understand about their grief when they're 9 is going to look different than the way they tell that story when they're 13. And some of it's because of the way they practice telling the story. Some of it's because they understand it differently as they get older.
So you've noticed that some kids may not share in the sharing circle the first year, but then when they come back, for the majority of the kids that come back, maybe they share the second year or the third year, and then that story evolves the more they come back.
Yes, I've seen it all different ways. I've seen other kids who don't say a single word for 4 years, to the point where we're like, why is he coming? Does he get anything out of this? And then, year 4, year 5, all of a sudden he's ready. So it's just, this is a big theme of grief, right? And this, one of the big learnings we know, there's no timeline on grief. And especially with kids, we assume that things need to look a certain way or on a certain schedule that the adults feel it should be on. But in reality, every kid is going to do it at their own pace, and they're going to unfold different parts of it at different times as their grief evolves, which will be a lifelong process for every single one of them.
That's the same way in adulthood.
Right.
Grief is a lifelong process, and it's something that unfolds in its own time. And there are expectations, even with adulthood grief, where friends and family expect after a year, 2 years, 3 years, that you've moved on, you're going forward, you're doing okay, everything's fine, you're back on track.
Right.
And grief doesn't work that way. There's always triggers, and it's the same for children. There will always be triggers as they go throughout the rest of their lives, because that person will forever be gone. That person will forever be missed. So the parallels are actually quite interesting. I think the process of understanding what grief is obviously very, there's a stark difference between adults and children. And there's a very different load that's carried for each. But I think that this idea of coming to a camp and finding ways to release that and process through that, and knowing that you can come back year after year after, that it will be there. It's something to rely on. That's intriguing to me. And I think that that's comforting in a way. I almost wish we had that for adults.
Right.
So you've got the sharing circle. What other clinical activities and programming do you have throughout the week that help shape kids, that help give them, because one of the questions I want to ask is skills and tools that these kids can take with them. So what do you do throughout the week that give these kids what they need when they leave?
There's a number of things. So like I said, we have these facilitated, what we call clinical activities throughout the week. There's the sharing circles, and then there's the other days where we do other types of activities. And these change year after year, but they might be one year really rooted in creativity and art, and we might be doing some kind of, art project that we're then putting expressive words to. So for instance, one we did last year was we called the grief roller coaster. So the kids were given a piece of paper and markers, and they had to draw, like a roller coaster, the highs and lows of their lives, right? What has their life trajectory looked like, and kind of where do you hit those peaks and those dips, and, to draw it all out. And then they would share that. Right. So just by taking something physical on a piece of paper, putting a creative spin on it, so using that childhood, element they have in them with drawing or creativity, but then being able to help them articulate with words what it is they're saying or feeling. Tell me about those peak points. What was happening here? Tell me about, it looks like you had a real low point here. What happened? Oh, and then it went back up, didn't it? Right. So there's also an element of hope that is articulated through this to show when there are those dips, there's always something that comes back up after that. So that's an important thing for them to understand. So when you talk about the toolkit, right, the coping skills, one of those is identifying hope by being able to translate what they're feeling into the words that express hope, because that is so pivotal to what we want them to take away. That's their biggest tool. So that when they are sitting in math class in November and starting to have a panic attack because they think about their mom, as a math class is about to start, what do you do in that moment? Oh, right, I have some breathing techniques I learned in that one activity. Or I can even just think back to that time I won tug of war, right? And it kind of, all of those things, whatever that kid needs, and it's going to be different for each one of them. But we want them to have all of the items on the menu to choose from whenever they need to pull on that and really use that throughout the year to ensure that they have what they need in those moments and in terms of what we can give them at camp.
So now the week that they're at camp, I'm assuming that each group of kids are kind of grouped into different cabins, and then they're assigned different camp counselors or leaders in training that are kind of assigned to their cabin. So they're kind of in their own little group, but then as a camp as a whole as well. Is that kind of how it's structured?
Yes. Oh, it sounds like you've done your homework. Okay. Yes. So they're in.
I always do.
They are in bunks by age group. So they're in groups with other kids who are in their grade or in their age. They have counselors, like you said, who are volunteers. And they do most of their activities within their age group. But when they go out to just do their general activities, free swim, we do an activity called College League, which is an all-camp competition where you're broken into teams of all different ages. So you are interacting with other kids of other ages, which is also a really nice element of what kids experience at camp. Because the younger kids look up to the older kids. The older kids become leaders. We have a leader in training program, and it allows them to sort of take their experiences and pay it forward to help those younger kids, which makes them feel good.
Yeah, I would think too that would be really nice for the younger kids, because they can look to these older kids and say, they've made it.
Exactly.
Look at where they are. Look at how they're coping. Look how well they're doing. If they can do that, maybe I can do that too. So I would think that playing off of that and interacting with the older kids that have walked a similar path has got to be really rewarding in and of itself.
You're absolutely right. And we also see that with our
Hmm.
counselors, even the adults that we have, most of them have experienced loss as well. So it's
Hmm.
always interesting to see when the kids, meet their counselors and immediately, smitten with them as these adult role models. And then they go into a sharing circle on that next day and they're like, "Oh my God, you also had somebody die?" Like they don't even realize until they're
Hmm.
there and it occurs to them that they are truly surrounded by other people who get it. And to be able to see those
Hmm.
adults, adulthood seems so far away, but it's to see that and
Hmm.
know not only is this person okay, but they're super cool. And like I can be that too. There's just something really special about that dynamic.
And now you guys do, I'm assuming, like bonfires and certain fun activities at night as well?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
So the campfires are a really sacred and special time during the week. We do about 3 each week because it is a nice time after a very loud and busy day that is, again,
Mhm.
very high in energy. You've got all these kids with their pent up energy from the year exploding
Mhm.
everywhere with their joy. The campfires really give us a time to quiet it down and reflect. And it might be, the first night we do it very in a very light way where we say,
Mhm.
we're all coming together. We're all here because everyone here has had somebody important to them that died. We're just going to take a minute with that and look around and just recognize that fact.
Mhm.
The midweek campfire might be a couple of kids sharing their stories and modeling that, some of the older kids modeling it for the younger kids, for example. So,
Mhm.
really showing the power of that community and the power of being a leader in that space, in that way that you are with your grief. And then the end of week campfire is really, I think, one of the most powerful and meaningful experiences that we have at each and every program that we run. And that's where, we have, first of all, it's the last night of camp. So everybody's all in their feelings about that, right? All of
Mhm.
these relationships that they've built where we're calling each other brothers and sisters. And so everybody's
Mm.
gotten so close in such a short time is about to come to an end. And they're
Mhm.
going back into this world outside of the protective bubble we've created.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of feelings, and there's a campfire, and the entire camp is there. And every person there has an opportunity to stand up, light a candle for their person, and say something.
Oh, wow.
And almost every kid will do it, and
Mhm.
adult. Some will just say, "I'm lighting this candle for name my person," and
Mhm.
other people will tell their story. And like I was saying before, some of them haven't done that before, right? Even in
Right.
their sharing circles, they might not have felt comfortable, but they
Mhm.
get to this point where, time's a ticking, we're heading home the next day. And it's really powerful and beautiful to hear not only their expression, right? So they're sharing their stories, they're being so brave to stand up there and share their truth, but then to see the way other kids support them, that's the thing. Right? The sharing is wonderful. We've done a lot of that throughout the week, but to see
Mhm.
these kids stand up and wrap their arms around each other and physically create almost like, again, a protective barrier around each kid that is struggling in that moment, struggling to find the words or say the words, or just being brave in their own story. That is probably the most profound thing we see and do. And the way that kids will remember that feeling they had at camp, I think, for a very long time after that.
Wow. It's definitely it's a unique experience, and I love the fact that kids can come back year after year. It's not just a one and done type of experience. They can look forward to it each and every year. So, how you said you have 6 of these across the US?
We have 6 locations. We're actually opening our 6th program next summer in Maryland. So now our camps will be in Maine, Michigan, California, Georgia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania.
Wow. Okay. So plenty of opportunities for families to reach out and bring their children to these camps. I am curious. I know that you guys have different activities and stuff to really pinpoint and target certain things throughout the week. What happens if a kid triggers? What happens if something happens while they're at camp that really triggers an emotional response or has them feeling really anxious or not sure how to deal with what they're going through? Are there trained counselors that are kind of on site in case something really comes up emotionally where a kid really just needs to sit down one-on-one with somebody?
Yeah, I mean, it does happen all the time, obviously, with the
Hmm.
population that we're serving. So each camp has what's called a clinical director, which is the head of the clinical team,
Okay.
and then grief specialists that are assigned to each bunk. So each bunk has its own grief specialist that not only facilitates those activities with them, but are also their sort of professional on site should anything happen, should anything come up. A lot of the time they spend is on the one-to-one. So those, they have their one period a day, that's our bereavement activity, but the rest of the time is really helping troubleshoot some behaviors and understanding kind of what's at the root of those. It's
Hmm.
often grief, but there's other stuff that goes on too. So helping create, behavior plans for kids, but really just understanding where a kid's coming from and what's showing up for them, especially to your point, when somebody is triggered or when emotions just come out in a big way. We have the most amazing volunteer counselors, but they're not trained to the same degree as our clinicians are. So those clinicians are really there to support not only the cabin staff in helping with that bunk, but certainly each individual child. We don't do therapy at camp, but it is a therapeutic model. So it does, tend to kind of creep close to, some of those
Hmm.
emotional interventions and just making sure that kids have the support they need in that community, in that environment, and that when that child goes home, the caregiver knows what happened and
Hmm.
can take it from there in terms of finding the support locally, and we'll connect them with bereavement centers or therapists or others that can help them in their local communities to make sure they're continuing to get the support that they need.
So this next question is probably not going to be super easy to answer, but
Oh.
because you've had so many children come through these camps, like you said, you've heard thousands of grief stories. Do you have a story that comes to mind that is a hopeful story, like something where it just fills you with so much joy because you've seen how they've evolved or how they've overcome their loss or are moving forward, that you kind of carry with you as you do these camps every summer? Is there a story that sticks out for you?
There's so many, and there's so many each summer that I sort of hold on to in my story arsenal for the year. But the
Hmm.
one that popped into my head when you just asked that question that I'll share, our very first year at camp, now we have charter buses that bring the kids to camp and, hundreds at a time. But that first year, as I said, there were 27 kids, and two of them came from New Hampshire to Maine. So we had sent a white van for them with a
Hmm.
counselor, and like this white van pulls into camp. I know it sounds creepy. It doesn't. I don't mean it that way. But this white van pulls into camp, and two kids popped out, and they were Keith and Logan.
Hmm.
And I say often, that first summer, I can remember so much about it. It was like somehow my senses were so heightened that week that I've captured so many memories from back in 2009. But Keith hitting the ground from that van and like starting to play frisbee. They were the first two kids that arrived at camp. And that class of kids really they became my boys. They were all boys at that time, but
Hmm.
they hold such a special place in my heart because they were the first. And they were the first of everything, right? They were the first class of kids we had. They were the first to become LITs, leaders in training. They were the first to become volunteers after being counselors. And they, as much as anyone else, helped us define this program. Even from
Hmm.
that first year, I remember we did a sharing circle the first full day of camp, and they came to us at the end of camp and said, we would like an opportunity to do another sharing circle because we didn't really know each other when we first started, and we didn't get to say everything we wanted to say.
Oh, wow.
And literally from that point forward, we had a sharing circle twice a week. From every other camp we've ever done has had two sharing circles. Like, they helped us define, what we do. So anyway, this class of kids has a very special place in my heart, along with Keith and Logan. And Keith has come back in particular. Logan did for a long time too. But Keith has been a volunteer with us every year.
Hmm.
And Keith is now a firefighter like his dad was before he died.
Oh.
And Keith recently got married to another volunteer who volunteers with us now. So they made it his family thing. And I just saw the other day that Keith and his wife are pregnant. and expecting a little girl.
Oh, wow.
So when you ask about getting a little, when you ask about kind of those stories that stay with me,
Mhm.
I don't know if anybody can say what Keith's life would have been had camp not been a part of it. We'll
Right.
never know that other story that would have been. But to see him thriving like that, and to see him starting a family, and having known him when he was, 9 or 10 years old, and just being part of his upbringing in a way, and
Right.
then coming to this incredible milestone and being part of other milestones, but this is a big one. It's such a, again, I said this word before, but it's such a privilege to be a part of that, to be a part of someone's life like that, to know that despite the hardships, despite the unexpected turns and twists that a life can take, these kids can be okay if they're
Mhm.
given the right support, if they have the right environments, if they have the right mentors, and if they have a place to go where other people get it.
Mhm.
And I've seen that for Keith play out really beautifully in his life.
That's amazing. That's a beautiful story, and it is emotional, and it's also strengthening, and it's inspiring, and I think that's, the takeaway for so many things is that we want to inspire and instill hope and let people know that not all is lost, that there is a light and there is a way forward. It's just figuring out what that is and then surrounding yourself by the right people, with the right people. And that's what these camps offer, and that's what makes them so special. Um, I I do want to touch on, because this is something that I haven't been able to dive into as much, and I've been wanting to for quite some time. And I mentioned it, I think, last season in the show. Do you feel that there's a disparity and a lack of resources among racial groups and grief? Because I've noticed through my own work and my own research that there does seem to be a lack of resources, and that there does seem to be this gap, this disparity among different racial groups and cultural groups when it comes to grief and loss.
There absolutely is. Yes, that's something that we are very focused on, and I'm personally very focused on in terms of how we approach that strategically as an
Mhm.
organization and as humans who believe in creating opportunities where they don't exist for groups of kids. And that's one that we know from the research, from the data, and even from who's coming to camp,
Mhm.
that there is absolutely a disparity in the amount of grief that Black and Brown children experience. We know that
Mhm.
they statistically have parents and siblings die at higher rates and earlier than their white peers.
Mhm.
And yet they don't have access to the same resources in their communities, and they aren't as likely to find something like experience camps.
Mhm.
And we know that from even the way, when we just have an open application program, most of the kids that are coming to us are white, yet most of the kids that are grieving in the country are not white.
So how do you reach those kids? Yeah, how do you close that gap?
Yeah, it's a complicated answer, and there's
Mhm.
multiple layers of it, and we're trying to kind of hit a bunch of them at the same time. So
Mhm.
one of the ways we want to do that first and foremost is to ensure that we have volunteers of color. We want to make sure when they get there that there are people who look like them on the other side of their bunk, right? The
Mhm.
adults in the room. So the first thing we've really been working on over a couple of years is ensuring that we're increasing the inclusion, the opportunity, the recruitment of volunteers of color. So first bringing into the space a more of a diverse makeup of adults. And then we recently just did an ethnographic research study over the summer where we're really trying to understand in a more with more of a methodology behind it exactly that question: why aren't kids coming to camp? What are people in different communities of different backgrounds, where are they getting their grief support, or are they at all?
Mhm.
And one of the big insights we found from that had to do with trust. And caregivers and parents, especially in communities where most Black and Brown people are less likely to trust an organization that will take their kids on a bus into the woods with mostly white counselors and spend a week with them without cell phones, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we have to work a little bit harder there to build trust with those communities and to assure them that This is a place where their kids belong and a place where their kids will be safe. So those are the things that we're doing now in a more localized fashion. So whereas before we used to just kind of put it out there, we're like, everybody come to camp, here's our application. Now we are going into communities and partnering with community centers, with schools, with the places that people do trust because they're local to them, and partnering with them to do what we're calling playing through grief events, right? So workshops where we can integrate grief and play, and we can create an experience for kids where they can, similarly to that scene I described when they come off the bus where their shoulders come down, we want to create a space that kids and adults can learn to trust what we're doing through play and through just exposure, just knowing us and seeing the people that we are and that we have in our organization, so that they will be more likely to come to camp. And also so that if camp isn't the thing for them, because camp's not going to be the thing for everybody, that they still have an opportunity to experience grief support in their local communities, right? So that we're able to provide these kind of mini camps for them so they can still normalize and still understand there's a community of people like them, even if they don't get on that bus and come to camp.
Right. So going from that question and this monumentous kind of challenge that there is out there in the community to the holiday season, what would you say to those? Because the holidays are a really difficult time for children, even for adults. I mean, speaking for myself, it is a very challenging time period for many who are struggling with grief and loss. So as we kind of in the midst of holiday season and starting a new year, what would you say to those that are struggling with this? And do you guys talk about that at all when they're at camps during the summer about how to get through tough sections or challenging parts of the year, like Christmas and Thanksgiving, especially for parents who might be listening right now, that have lost a spouse or a child of their own and have by extension, remaining children that have lost a sibling or a parent. I know I get a lot of questions from parents that say, I lost my husband or my wife and I'm struggling myself and I have no idea how to even help my child. And we're approaching the holidays and it is difficult.
Yeah, it's a hard one, right? And I think most grieving people would say there's no way around it except for through it. And what we tell people, we actually just had we do a virtual holiday campfire once a year. We just did it last weekend, and our kids came online and their caregivers and shared their stories and their holiday memories and their traditions. And so I think the first part of that is giving children in particular a place to remember in a positive way if they have positive memories, those memories or those traditions. And maybe sometimes they don't, and it's also acknowledging that. Right? Not every story of loss is one that was filled with love. So I think there's that element of it too, to make sure that we are honoring the real experiences that kids have or the feelings that they have about their person. So I think it's encouraging them to reflect on the memories, the stories that they have, but also creating new traditions, giving kids an opportunity to create something new. That goes back to the hope that we were talking about before. Right. Recognizing that new memories will be made, new traditions can happen without that person or with that person as part of that tradition. And we actually, some of our kids were sharing stories about that at our campfire the other night and how they were able to, take, one kid was talking about how they used to crush up candy canes and pancakes. And like, that's the thing that they still do now to remember their person, like those tastes or smells or scenes that they had as happy memories. How can you take that forward with you, or how can you build something new? So I think there's, a few things like that in terms of remembering, building new traditions, creating space for the stories, saying the name of the person who died and letting the child know it's okay to still talk about that. A lot of kids will tell us that it feels like it's too hard for other people to talk about it, so they choose not to talk about it, and then it becomes very quiet. Right? So using the holidays maybe as a time to open that conversation back up, so the kids can share their stories. But I think the last one, and I could keep going and going, but the last one I would say is just honoring what is the truth for each person who is grieving. And what I mean by that is we get a lot of the ho, 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 happy holidays through the
Mm-hmm.
media and through, everywhere you look, there's an expectation of joy and lightness and happiness. And more times than not, that's not going to be real for the people who are grieving, and
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. And maybe it's not about trying to fit into the mold of what everyone around you and the window displays expect you to be, but just
Mm-hmm.
honoring the truth of what the holidays are and just sitting in the muck.
Yep.
And that's okay too. Just feeling your feelings. So making space for that, making space for the conversation, and just being authentic with your grief and gentle with yourself.
Now, you mentioned that you do these virtual campfires once a year. Is this open to kids who haven't experienced the camp yet, or is this for campers who've already been through experience camp, and then this is kind of a touching base before the holidays each year?
For this event, it is a touching base for the kids who are already part of our community and new campers who are coming next year.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have actually, we haven't talked about this, but we do have a new program we've developed this year that is for all grieving kids in Minecraft. And it is a moderated server that we've created, a safe listed server. So you have to apply and register to get into it. And once you're in it, there are basically volunteers, moderators that are there to ensure that kids are, on good behavior, which they tend to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's for all grieving kids. So it's another space similar to camp where they can come be part of a community. They can play, they can create, they can talk on Discord. There's all this gaming lingo I've learned through this. So I don't know if it's familiar to everyone else. But that is a place where we are now welcoming in all grieving kids, not just the experience camps kids that we already have at camp. That's been an incredible new way of connecting people and building community in a place where kids already are, right?
Right.
There's a lot of kids playing Minecraft in the world. This is another opportunity for them to be part of a community and be part of something really special that allows them to feel less alone in what they're going through.
That's fascinating. And it was actually going to be one of my questions was what's coming up, in the new year that is kind of new to your programming. So, and for everybody who's listening, I will have this information on our website at Game On Glio Podcast. And I will be sharing all of Experience Camp's information as well so that you can get access to all of this. I think it's really fascinating how you're incorporating what kids are doing right now these days as a way to help them find healing. Minecraft is huge. It's everywhere right now. So I think that that's extremely beneficial to be able to tap into those kind of narratives and those veins of what kids are doing on a regular basis as a way to connect with them. And I think that that's vital when it comes to working with kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing we know about the way, the technology and programs and just kids are in the world. You have to continually grow and change to meet them in the ways they want to be served.
Right.
I think we as adults try to make a lot of assumptions about kids. And what we have found at experience camps is we do a lot better when we just ask them and they tell us. And that's been something that's been incredible with both the Minecraft program and other programs we're developing, is that they're all being designed and led by youth voices. Even our social media accounts and the ways that we're sharing content to educate the public about childhood grief, we're using their voices to do that. We're asking them, what do you want people to know about your experience? Rather than saying, this is what we think about childhood grief. We're saying, you tell us, you be the teachers. And amazing things happen when you ask kids. They are super smart and very, very in tune with what they need when you ask them.
Yeah.
So we've really learned a lot from them, and we'll continue to do so as we develop new ways of meeting them where they are.
So now let me ask you this, and this will be my last question to you. As we're talking about meeting children where they are and helping them through these experience camps, how do you feel these camps help the parents? What does this give to the parents of grieving children who they themselves are grieving as well?
A couple things that I've heard them say over the years. One of them is at the most basic level, a break. Those who are coming, those kids who do come to camp, their caregivers, their parents are home for that week. Usually kind of nervous at first, and then we start sending them hundreds of pictures every night, and they start to feel a little better when they see, pictures of smiling kids, and we send detailed notes home every night to really connect them to the experience that their kids are going through, while creating a separation that allows each of them to experience that week in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
But what the caregivers have told us is there's so much that they can do in that week to take care of themselves when they know that their kid is being taken care of by us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that giving them permission to take a breath. We talk about putting on the oxygen mask. Like,
Yeah.
we allow them to put on their oxygen mask that week so that when their kids come home, they can feel refreshed and rejuvenated to parent a grieving child, which is hard. It's hard in any circumstance to parent a grieving child while you are grieving.
Yeah.
And we want them to also have that opportunity to take care of themselves in that week without having to worry.
Mm-hmm.
So we give them that ability. And then I think another really nice thing that happens is when the kids come home, the night before they come home, we send a note home to the parents and say, this is what you can expect when your kid gets home. Either it's on the bus or whether you pick them up. They're probably not going to want to talk to you at first. They keep it a little bit close to the vest for those first. But once they start to open up, here's some things you can ask. Ask them about college league. Ask them about the food. Ask them about their friends in their bunk. And what we're doing in that is giving them the prompts to create a conversation with their kids, to rebuild a bridge that might not have been there before. Maybe they're opening it up for the first time. But the wheels have been greased at camp in terms of the sharing and the openness. Let's continue that into their home life so that that parent has a better connection to their own child when they get home, which is going to serve not only that child better, but also that parent who is seeking out ways or craving ways to connect with their kid. So there's some things that happen there. And then even throughout the year, as we stay in touch with people and remind them that they're not alone. The parents and caregivers are going through this just as much as the kids are in totally different ways. And we want to make sure they know they are connected to this community as well, which, as you've said and we've said, can feel so isolated wherever you are in your grief and whatever role you're playing in that.
Right. That's beautiful. And I think that this is so empowering, and it's such this is such a great space to be able to have this conversation and to be able to talk about this because, while we talk heavily about brain cancer advocacy and education and the effects of brain cancer specifically, we also talk a lot about grief and loss just in general. But when you're experiencing brain cancer, it's a domino effect. Everybody is impacted by the weight of that. And there are so many families that I have met, children who have lost a parent to brain cancer. Or I was just in New York City too long ago, met a wonderful woman and her son, who is an adult, married, kids, works. She lost her 30-year-old daughter to brain cancer, and he lost his sister. So she was talking about the effects of that on her and the younger kids that experienced losing their older sibling. And so this is so empowering to just know that there is a resource out there for these kids who have gone through so much, have seen so much that they shouldn't see. They shouldn't have to walk through these really heavy experiences, but they do. And the one thing I've learned in meeting all of these different groups of individuals is that children are so resilient, more so than adults a lot of times. And they really inspire me. They give me strength. And it's amazing to see what they walk through. And so, the camps that you're doing are just, I can't say enough good things about it. I mean, I just think that it's so beautiful. It seems that you guys are growing, so you're opening more opportunities up for more campers. And so as we head into 2023, when do they officially start? Do they start in June? Are they all kind of within the same time frame, or are they scattered throughout like the summer months?
All of the camps currently take place in August. So it's staggered over 4 or 5, I think it's 4 weeks this year. So we have a couple that happening at the same time, but yeah, throughout the month of August.
Okay. And so let our listeners know, as we're getting ready to wrap up, where they can find more information. Where can they learn more about experience camps? Where is there an application deadline for people who want to have their kids in camps this summer? And I want to make sure these camps are free to kids, correct?
Yes, that is true. Yes. The camps are 100% free.
Okay. That's a big deal. I want to stress that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We fundraise all year to ensure that cost is never going to be a barrier for any child that comes to camp, regardless of their financial situation. So
Okay.
camps are free to everybody. We also help get them there. They either take those buses. We have flight scholarships. We never want we want to remove as many barriers as possible to help kids
Okay.
get the support that they need. And everything can be found on our website, which is experiencecamps.org.
Okay.
And I would also encourage people, if you are TikTok followers, we have an incredible TikTok presence with a lot of videos that are showing and telling the experience of grieving kids through their voices. As I mentioned before, it's a really great place to just get educated about childhood grief. And it's also just really fun. It's most of the joy of camp can be felt through a lot of our social media content, as well as our blog, which has a lot of great information about grief in general, grief in the holidays, all of the relevant timelines and topics around grief. But all of that can be found, like I said, on our website. And in terms of our camper application, there is no deadline, but it will fill up, and it is filling up fast this year,
Okay.
faster than ever before.
Okay.
And that's both for camper and volunteer applications. So I definitely encourage your listeners, if you're interested in learning more about it for a child or even for a volunteer opportunity, sooner than better would be good, because we're just seeing such an incredible demand for programs and for support.
And then what's the handle for your TikTok?
At Experience Camps.
At Experience Camps. Okay. Well, Sara, thank you so much for joining us today. This is such a wonderful conversation to have, and it's empowering and it's uplifting, and I really hope that our listeners are able to take advantage of this and utilize this as support for their own families and their own kids. There's just so much to offer there. And if anybody gets a chance, please go visit the website, because I've been on there. The videos are really great. The stories you get to see and witness. And it really does give you a good idea of what the camps look like. And there are a lot of resources up on the website as well for those who are looking. So Sara, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share our story and what we do, and connect with hopefully some new people.
And with that, we will be right back.
Imagine waking up from brain tumor removal surgery knowing that your radiation treatment is already underway. That's how gamma tile therapy works. At the end of brain tumor removal surgery, your neurosurgeon implants tiny gamma tiles where the tumor is most likely to return. So instead of waiting to start daily standard radiation treatments that go on for weeks, you get a head start against tumor cells and get back to your life sooner. Gamma tile therapy is for operable brain tumors of all types, including glioblastomas, brain metastases, and meningiomas. It is a one-time targeted radiation treatment with fewer side effects and far less chance of hair loss than external radiation. Gamma tile therapy is FDA-cleared radiation therapy for patients with newly diagnosed malignant brain tumors and recurrent brain tumors. Gamma tile therapy is tough on tumors and easier on patients and caregivers. Learn more at gammatile.com.
I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. I wanted to expand the conversation, to bring in options and discussion for new ways of helping each other and helping those we love. By having a discussion about how to help children through grief and loss, it again reminds us that no matter what the circumstances are surrounding the loss of someone we love, there are people and communities out there that want to help lift us up. And there is no better time to have that kind of reminder than at Christmas time. Many of you are winding down from the holidays and gearing up for a new year. As we all do so, I want to share what I'm learning about the holiday season. Mike and I were married just before Christmas 15 years ago this year. The reason we had picked this time of year was because we truly felt its magic and love, and we wanted to share that abundant love with others. We wanted our love for each other to spread near and far, to touch others' lives. We wanted the magic of this season to be part of our relationship and all that that meant. While I struggle with the holidays now, I have come to realize that the real magic of this season, of Christmas, involves love. Love of family, friends, colleagues, strangers. And for some, an intimate, pure love of the heart. The greatest joy of this time of year is in giving rather than getting. By bringing these stories to life in my podcast, I hope to give all of you resources, a voice, faith, hope, inspiration, love. I hope to give to you. We have 2 episodes left of Season 2, and then we gear up for Season 3. So until next month, may all of you, my dear listeners, have a safe, healthy, joyous, and hopeful new year, filled with abundant love and friendship. You've been listening to the Game On Glio Podcast, the podcast that is designed to educate, advocate, and tell the real stories of those walking the journey of brain cancers such as glioblastoma and grief and loss. If you like our show, please share us with others. Follow us on Instagram at Game On Glio Podcast or on Facebook at Game On Glio. You can visit our website and our YouTube channel. You can find us anywhere podcasts are played.